viewers, I am Malika Ramsey. On this week's edition of our program, we focus on the environment. Some people seem to not know or be a bit unconscious to what's happening with our environment. We don't know that there are actually dangerous things in our environment that can really affect our livelihoods and our health. And of course, Mr. Granger, leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, has time and time again expressed that he is very concerned with what's happening with Guyana's environment. Welcome back, sir.
Thank you very much, Malika.
Great. Jumping right into it, Mr. Granger, we have a very hazardous situation in our environment currently. However, people are walking around as though it's normal. And there are sometimes when we're told that it's normal, for example, when the rain falls and we're flooded. Some people call it the accumulation of water. It's as if, not to worry. This is normal. It happens every year. Why is it that people are now believing, they're now comfortable with saying that this is a norm?
I agree with you. People are quite tolerant to environmental damage and degradation. I think they're missing the big picture. The big picture is that Guyana, certainly Guyana under Partnership for National Unity, is looking towards the creation of a green economy. That is an economy which is environmentally sustainable, but at the same time caters for the prosperity of the residents. For example, we could harvest logs, we could mine gold. At the same time, we don't have to pollute the rivers, we don't have to cut down trees without replacing them. We don't have to pollute the rivers. We don't have to endanger people's lives. So I think as a whole, the government has failed to convince the Guyanese population that we should build a green economy. And for APNU, that is central. We want an economy which is sustainable, but we can give our children and grandchildren a country that still has trees, that still has clean rivers, that still has an environment in which people can live. Now, there has been a degree of tolerance largely because of government negligence. And this takes place in several areas. People complain all the time. Mm-hmm. So it is baffling that the government has not taken corrective action. For example, a simple thing like dust. There has been a dust menace in the bauxite industry. There's a dust menace for people living by sawmills. There's a dust menace for people living by certain rice mills. But the government does not have an environmental strategy that goes to a sawmiller, that goes to a bauxite company, that goes to a rice mill and say, look, your effluent or your dust is affecting the residents. People are getting respiratory diseases, and you must stop it, or you must only build your mills in an industrial zone, some industrial park. But this is designated as a housing area, and you're not allowed to emit dust. Or even if you have an industry that emits dust, you must have some sort of dust collector. You must have some way of preventing the dust from going into the atmosphere and creating a health hazard. And there are other areas too. For example, there's mining in the hinterland, and the miners use machines which create turbidity. That is, they generate a lot of dust, a lot of mud and muck into the water. But if you go into many indigenous communities in the hinterland, they drink the water from the rivers, they bathe in the water, they wash the water. They use the water for the normal purposes because some of them don't have household water purification system. So they depend on the river, they depend on the river 1,000 years. So we have a situation in which the government's neglect of environmental issues for so long has allowed people to almost get accustomed to low standards. And as a result, what we see happening is that people feel that low standards are normal. And this is what is causing a great health problem. This is what is causing, I think, I would even say violence, because if you looked at what happened at the National Two Shows Conference, you saw indigenous people picketing against the government, against the conduct of the National Two Shows Conference, because they have land issues. And some of those land issues are related to the pollution of rivers. Since Amerindian communities depend wholly on some rivers and creeks for their pure water. Miners pollute the river. People get ill, they get diseases, and sometimes they face premature death. So you're quite right that people have become accustomed, and that is what we have to reverse. People must not get accustomed to low standards. People must not get accustomed to poor health. People must not get accustomed to a damaged environment.
Taking all that you've just said into consideration, because your response to this may be a bit redundant, I can recall in 2012 you had called for a comprehensive strategy to deal with the environment, which is similar to a current call from a Partnership for National Unity. Since then, have you seen or have you had any indication, whether it be from government or even our citizens, that, look, we want to improve, we want to protect, we want to preserve our environment? Have you seen any change since then? Any effort?
The change has taken place in the mind of former President Jack Dio. He discovered a way to make money. That there are some rich countries, particularly industrialized countries, which are prepared to give grants to countries which still have a large part of their forests intact. And because these forests are regarded as the lungs of the earth, particularly the forested area to which we are close, that is the Amazonian basin, there is so much vegetation there that it is described as the lungs of the earth. Now, some of the richer countries are actually prepared to pay the poorer countries to keep a significant part of the forest intact, because those forests absorb carbon dioxide. So through the industrial practices, they generate a lot of harmful toxic substances into the air, and the vegetation absorbs it. But beyond that, I have not seen a strategy on the part of the government of Guyana, the People's Progressive Party Civic Administration, to deal with a wider range of environmental issues. All we hear about is the low carbon, the LCDS, low carbon development strategy. That's good, but it's not good enough. We need more, and we need to have environmental practices spread right across the country. Anybody coming into this country, hearing that Jack Dio got so many awards and he's held in such high esteem because of environmental work, would be astonished to go around the cities and towns and the countryside, go along our beaches, go into the hinterland, fly over mining districts. He said, how come this man is champion of the earth? How come Guyana has such a good reputation? The country is being scarred by the day. And if you read the Sabbath News of Friday, the 25th of October, you would have seen that the rate of deforestation has increased, the pace has increased, and that we actually might be losing money from those same credits from Norway and other places because of the rampant deforestation that's taking place, largely because of mining. So what it tells us is that greedy people, some, not all miners, but greedy people, are simply chopping down the forest, taking out the gold, leaving huge holes, filling with water. Some of them breed mosquitoes, some of them are just left stagnant. But when you fly over some parts of this country, particularly in Region 8, the Potaro-Separuni region, it looks like a diseased body. You know, it looks like, you ever see a dog with mange or with abscesses and sores? It looks sick. But this is the country where we had a president getting, awards for environmental consciousness, but we have not got a strategy that protects the whole environment. Looks after solid waste management, looks after coastal zone management, looks after air and pure water supply, looks after public health. I mean, even at the beginning of this year, between February and March particularly, we had over 500 children getting ill from waterborne diseases in one region alone. And in September, we had a child dying at Masakanari in the Rupununi. from waterborne disease. So we have a problem in our hands, and the government has to take the lead. And that is why APNU is calling on the government to craft a strategy, not just have a little program for LCDS to earn money, but a strategy to deal with all 8 or 10 issues in the agenda for environmental preservation and conservation.
All right. If I can talk about deforestation for a bit, we know that the gold rush, in a sense, causes the deforestation, but if I can ask this, how is there a way that we can probably balance the two? Because the gold is needed and our forests are needed. It's sacrifice. I don't know. How can we not sacrifice one for the other?
Well, I once asked an engineer the same question,
Okay.
a geologist really, not an engineer. I said, how do you account for this environmental damage? He says, if you want an omelet, you have to break the egg. Maybe that's a clever way of putting it. And I suppose it's true. You really can't eat an egg with the shell on. You've got to break the shell. And the shell, of course, in this case is the environment. But this is nothing new. We have been exploiting minerals, exploiting timber for decades upon decades. And what we're looking at is a pattern, a package, a program of responsible and sustainable exploitation. For example, if you take gold out of an area, the area has to be replanted. After it has been exhausted, you can plant certain types of vegetation to hold the soil together, and the trees will spring up. And there are particular types of plants which could be used for reforestation. So that seems not to have been done in many of the areas that I've flown over within the last 3 years or so. Similarly, in forestry, there could be control on the extraction of certain species. If certain species are being overexploited, for example, people have built a lot in Granger. If we feel that Granger was on the point of being extinguished, maybe you could, say, well, look, people can only cut down so many hectares of Granger a year and allow the forest to regenerate itself. So things like that could be done. Similarly, the rivers, we can implement measures to prevent dumping of toxic chemicals into the rivers, plastics, styrofoam, effluent, sewage, and so on. There is a whole host of environmental measures which could be implemented if we had the political will and the political organization. That is why APNU is calling for a strategy which brings all of these measures together. The important thing in this green economy is to protect human lives, to protect people. And it is not greed, it is not to allow as much plunder as possible, it is to protect people. But you want people to live a good life, so you want to take the gold out, as you're saying. You want to cut the timber, but it could be done in a sustainable way. It could be done without endangering the lives and livelihood of our hinterland dwellers. So that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the strategy, and it is quite possible that a strategy could be crafted which allows exploitation of minerals with the good life.
You talked about the rivers earlier, especially in the hinterland communities, and the fact that we have children getting ill and even dying because of diseases. Now, let's say that the Guyana Water Incorporated goes into the hinterland communities, or they're sent into the hinterland communities, and there's a proper development plan in terms of providing water for those communities, if it's possible, aside from the rivers. Do you think we'd see some change in what's happening in those communities regarding the health of our citizens?
It needs a massive program. The Guyana Water Incorporated, GWI, has gone in. We have gotten help from the Japanese, we've gotten help from international agencies. And in some indigenous communities, you can see these hand-operated pumps. And there are some villages in which we have wind chargers and solar panels which produce electricity to drive machines which pump water. So it is not as though nothing has been done, but we are arguing that enough has not been done. For example, in the whole field of energy, we feel that it's not just GWI, because GWI, needs energy to bring the water, deliver the water to people's homes. But there are several areas of generating energy in a sustainable way which are not being exploited by this government. One, of course, is wind power. And we can use more wind charges along the coastland. You can see in some developed countries, which are rich, which have access to fuels like petrol and other fuels, but they use wind charges because it is environmentally sustainable. You use the wind is free. We don't have much of that in Guyana. We can use solar power, and the government is treating solar panels like toys, give this person but not that person, give this village but not that village. But even in the city we can use solar panels because there's some houses without electricity, and I know some houses steal electricity. But if we use more solar panels, we can have whole farms, not just individual houses. You can have whole farms of solar panels which provide energy to whole villages. Then we can use biofuels, for example, using the waste of pig dung, cow dung, and so on, and other waste products. They could be put in a digester. They generate methane gas, which could be used as a fuel. Those of our viewers who have lived in South Georgia would know that there was a dump at the Lurapantir Seminary. And from time to time the dump would catch fire. Well, the dump caught fire because the waste generates a gas. As the waste disintegrates, it generates a gas. And that gas sometimes could become ignited, and that's why sometimes it burns and sometimes it flares. So there's biogas, and I've been to sites in foreign countries in which the biogas is actually trapped and used to generate power. And of course there's hydropower. APNU supports hydropower, efficient hydropower, and there's wave power, just the action of waves on the seashore. The power could be trapped and converted into energy, but our government does not have a strategy for using all of these forms: wind, biogas, solar power, wave power, hydropower to generate electricity. It is still too dependent on hydrocarbon, on gasoline and gasoline and so on. So we need a strategy to generate cheap power, abundant power, clean power.
You mentioned the Lurapantir Cemetery. Most persons knew it, as the Mandela dump site. Now the big.
No, I wouldn't associate the name of
associate
that great
Mandela.
man with the dump site.
My apologies.
Let's call it Lurapantir.
Now, it was all over the news that persons, especially government, was saying that, once that site was no longer the site, once it was moved to the Hicks Bosch area, that we should have seen less garbage piled up in the city. Now, why has that not happened, if you can say?
I don't want to say. I think the answer is difficult in the matters of detail. Some of the problems are, one, that the new site is further away from the city than the Lurapantir site. Further away on perhaps the busiest highway in Guyana, the East Bank Highway. And from the amount of accidents you see, the congestion you see, you realize that it is not the easiest route to go to dispose of garbage. And number two, there seems to be some problem about the actual construction of the landfill. This is a very technical matter because it has a capacity, and every day it can only take so many tons of garbage, and the garbage is only delivered between certain hours. So if you have more tonnage per day being generated because of restaurants and households and industries and so on, there's a build-up because it only works during daylight hours. So if you can, just for example, take 1,000 tons a day during daylight hours, and you're generating 1,200 tons, you'll always have a backlog. So there are problems like those. It may look to you and me as a mathematical problem, but it's a serious planning problem. That it seems that some of the problems expose poor planning. That they're not in. It's too far. It's expensive. There's not enough funding. The capacity is limited. The hours of opening are limited, and the actual construction may be at fault. So I don't want to go further than that because I don't want to oversimplify it. But those seem to be some of the problems.
Parliament and this issue of creating a proper strategy to deal with the environment. And I'm asking about Parliament in terms of what can you do, because I know previously APNU Member of Parliament, Mrs. Lawrence, had taken a motion as it relates to garbage and the environment. Can you link the two, or are you planning to take this as a new issue or as a new subject to Parliament?
It is not a new subject, it's a continuing subject. I think the motion brought by Mrs. Lawrence, who has responsibility for social protection, is an important one, is a good one. I think at the bottom of that policy, however, is the question of public information. There is a physical problem that, in the final analysis, just as you described just now, the garbage, once collected, has to be moved away. Otherwise, it will just stay there and get back into the household or get back into the canals. There needs to be public information, and there needs to be a strategy. One of the strategies is that we have to cut down on the use of non-biodegradable substances like styrofoam and plastics and the types of things we use, tarpaulins and so on, which are tires, which are difficult to degrade, to be broken up. You can break up paper, for example, you use paper in the toilets and it dissolves, but how long does it take a motor car tire to dissolve? So that's why we call for a strategy, because if you keep bringing used tires, used tires are used tires. The life is diminished and it will soon become unusable, very soon become unusable. So if, as a matter of policy, you are allowing used tires to enter, you will have a buildup of tires, of used tires, which have to be disposed of. Similarly, plastics. If you allow people to use plastic, shopping bags or food boxes, styrofoam, and you will have a buildup of waste which cannot be broken down, cannot be disposed of. It's better to use cardboard or some other substance which could be degraded. For example, instead of selling in a restaurant, instead of selling water by the bottle, you can sell a glass of water. You drink the water and the glass could be washed and used again. But you sell it in a bottle, the bottle has to be disposed of. There is no policy for recycling waste in Guyana, and much of this waste could be recycled. What we're talking about here is not rocket science. Other countries do it. You sometimes, even in Guyana here, I can go to there's a certain religious house I can go to, and there are bins for plastic and other forms of waste. You put your plastic in one bin so it could be recycled, and you put the other forms of waste which are degradable in another bin. So by separating them, sometimes even in foreign countries you go to households and you see different bins because the garbage is collected separately. But I don't know what has happened in Guyana. We seem to have a pretty dumb government that doesn't seem prepared to accept innovation. And that is what is causing the problem. And it's not one problem as deforestation or mercury pollution. It's every single area of environmental consciousness seems to be an area of environmental ignorance.
Before we have to come to a close, this is certainly interesting, and sitting listening to you, you talked about this stuff, the materials that we use that cannot be broken down, concrete, for example. Now, development is ongoing, We have buildings going up, and some people prefer concrete instead of wood. Now there you have it. How do you solve that problem? Because again, concrete, it doesn't matter what you do with it or where you throw it, it will not, even as water, it would get hard again. How do we solve that problem?
Well, nothing is wrong with building in concrete because it lasts long and it's going to be cheaper in the long term. Traditionally, Guyanese have built in wood, but many countries don't build in wood. We build in wood because wood was easily accessible and it was relatively cheap. Of course, we have famous buildings in wood, for example, St. George's Cathedral, City Hall, but the weather's taking a toll on these buildings. Now, building in concrete, is a fact of life. But what we need a code in which we do not cover over the open spaces with concrete. For example, we need parks, we need parapets, where we grow grass, we need more trees in the city. And Georgetown did not face this problem 50 years, maybe 40 years ago. But now people are cutting down the trees. Some areas that I used to pass as a youngster growing up in Georgetown, have all been covered over. They become car parks where we used to have canals, where we used to have tree-lined canals. We now see car parks and we now see vendors. Some areas, some roads have been widened, and where we had grass verges, again they're taken over by car parks or just covered over with concrete. Sometimes people build bridges and they leave and the bridges remain there, although the bridges serve no purpose. So we seem to have thrown building codes through the window. And even if we extend our housing settlements, people have to live. You cannot tell people to live on the grass. But maybe 50 years ago, this Great Sophia, which is the biggest ward in the city of Georgetown, well, it's more than Sophia, Patterson, Turkine, that used to be a sugar plantation. And many areas on the west coast of Demerara, east coast of Demerara, used to be sugar plantations, which means they were green. They had canals, they were well drained. But now they're taking over housing settlements, concrete, zinc, metal. So that is a fact of life. But knowing that, we must make sure that all of these new housing areas have green spaces. They have parks, they have playgrounds, they have parapets, so that when the rain falls, the water can be stored and moved away. The water could be absorbed into the soil, that trees would grow and keep the areas cooler. What we need is a comprehensive environmental strategy, because that is the way we will look after the comfort and well-being of our citizens and the health of citizens and give Guyanese a good life.
Okay. Finally, sir, taking into consideration all that you've said throughout this entire broadcast, it always comes back to finances and resources. How difficult is it, or how expensive is it for Guyana to create a green economy?
Well, I would say that it is cheaper to create a green economy than to try to mitigate the effects or try to reverse the effects of the type of economy we have now. Because in the case of the Barima-Waini region, where we have a situation in which 530 children got ill, can you imagine the flights, the medication which had to be taken in, the deaths which occurred, in order to reverse the effects or in order to correct the damage? So it is more expensive to cure people who are sick than to prevent them from getting sick in the first place. So when you take that at the national level, the people who are getting ill, becoming ill in the Kuyuni-Mazaruni region, from mercury pollution or from turbidity in the water. When you look at what is happening along the sea coast, the cutting down of the mangroves, the erosion of the coastline, the flooding that takes place, because of the damage to the coastal environment, these things are more expensive. It's more expensive to cure, the damage or to repair the damage than to have a green economy. A green economy is a cheap economy, but also a sustainable economy.
And that means prevention is better than cure.
In a word, yes.
Thank you very much, sir. Leader of the People's National Congress Reform and leader of the opposition, Mr. David Granger. We were discussing the environment. This has been another edition of The Public Interest. I am Malika Ramsey. Thanks for watching.